Well, welcome. Tonight we're going to talk about trees. And we have interesting people here because affectionately we all know them as the people who kill our trees. Every time one of them comes before our board at the FinCom, it's to get more money to take out more trees. But there's a lot more to the story. Certain parts of Milford, like if you grew up in the Heights, it's got the most beautiful trees, and Chuck, you'll talk about them, that we can remember. I don't know how long they've been there, but at least the 60 years that I've been alive, they've always been there and given beautiful shade behind the buildings in the Heights. But let's start with introductions.
Hi, I'm Chuck Teneau, Tree Warden, Milford, Mass.
Scott Crisafulli, Highway Surveyor, Milford Highway Department.
Charles Boddy, Town Council.
Now, one question always comes up. Who owns the trees?
The residents of Milford, the ones that are on public property. They are public shade trees.
So now, if I'm going up Congress Street and there's trees in people's yard, they're putting shade on the public area.
They are, but they are on private property. So the town would not have any responsibility there. We have the right to remove dangerous limbs that may be hanging over the road, but not the entire tree.
So you can trim them so we don't lose electricity.
Right, but the town doesn't engage in any trimming around the power lines. That's strictly done by the utility company, which would be National Grid. I get several calls a week on that. I have limbs that are touching, the wires, be it telephone or other communication wires, but you also have the power lines out there. And I always direct them back to the utility company. It is their responsibility to take care of the tree limbs that are around their overhead power.
But now you've got, I remember we were going through the poles. You got a hierarchy.
Yes.
That you have the cable, then the telephone.
And second, maybe, well, it used to be fire alarm was in there. We don't have that any longer.
And then electric on the top.
Well, you have the secondary electric, and then the top is the primary electric.
What's a secondary electric?
That's the one that feeds your house. It's a step down. The very top wires are the primary wires, be it a single wire or three wires. One being called single phase, the other being called three phase.
Who does that feed?
That feeds the entire town. Most of our power comes out of two substations, either down on Depot Street or the Rocky Hills substation up on, well, it's off of Route 16 up by the quarrying operation.
Huh. I don't think I even knew there was one down in Depot Street.
Yeah. Well, it's directly across from the pins.
Oh, yes. Now I know what you're talking.
And those are fed by the high tension lines, which are down in that area also.
Okay, now that makes sense, because I was thinking Depot Street down by Mazzarelli's and, Scotty's Mini Taj.
Yeah.
So now, who do you call, though? Do you call the electric? I mean, if I call the cable company.
Cable companies don't generally trim around their lines. Trimming around the lines is expensive, and people have to be trained. It is ruled that you cannot, without proper training, go within 10 feet of an energized power line. That's the law.
I never knew that.
Yeah.
I wouldn't want somebody up there with a chainsaw cutting through lines. I could wake somebody up quick.
Well, those three-phase lines, they're 13,800 volts.
Oh.
That's why you'll see during a storm, when you have trees down, we can't just push trees off the road.
You can't go near them.
If there's wires involved. So we have to leave and wait for the electric company.
But now, if they're live, what happens? You just leave live wires?
You have to leave them alone until they're certified dead by the electric company. We don't go near them. Actually, it's a general rule of thumb to stay at least one pole length, if not two, away from them.
So you do just close the streets?
Yep.
And wait for them to show up?
Mm-hmm. And if it's a storm, sometimes they're busy, and it could take a while. Yeah.
Days?
Yeah, we've had days.
You're going to shut down Congress Street for days?
If we can help it, no, but I mean, we push them as hard as we can to get there.
It's bad enough when you shut down the streets to dig up holes.
I know.
There was a big power outage in town today.
There was?
Yeah.
I didn't even know
It
that.
wasn't tree related. I called the tree people at National Grid and he said, no, not tree related.
Hmm.
I don't know what the incident.
Do you know what part of, I mean, that's,
Well,
Milford
all-
residents, we all want to know, what part
know.
of town?
The north end, all the Purchase Street area was out.
Is it back?
You know, it came back on probably about an hour.
Wasn't until I moved back to Milford that I found out Milford had a north end. Everybody
It's
kept,
just not Italian, though.
well, don't laugh, the real north end, we were joking, I know every restaurant in the north end. Never been to any.
I've never seen any
No,
restaurants
no,
up
no.
on Purchase Street.
Yeah, no. The north end in Boston, I've learned every restaurant, because my daughter now lives in the north end. So all I gotta do is look at my credit card, and every restaurant is there. It'd be nice if I ever got to go there, but.
Sure, yeah.
Okay, so now, trees that, if the trunk is on my lawn, I own the tree, even if it stretches out over the
Well,
public?
We might
It's not
defer.
necessarily true, it depends on where your lawn is. We had a
Right.
situation not long ago here where we had, it was Reservoir Street, I think it was,
Yep.
but we had somebody who went on to town property and cut down trees. But for all appearances, you would think it was their property, but it happened not to be. So you might put your lawn, many people extend their lawns right out to the street when they can. That does not, just because it's right at the edge of the street, does not
But
mean that that's your property.
Don't you go to the easement or whatever?
The
The
layout.
layout of the road.
Right.
It's very hard for people to understand the layout of the road.
Layout of the road typically is gonna include several feet on either side to allow for when the repair work is done, vehicles, equipment,
Right.
construction materials that you need to put off to the side, and all of that's a part of that public right of way.
Future
So,
expansion.
again, you have to be aware of where your property ends. A lot of people with irrigation systems do the same thing, they extend it out into what would normally be a sidewalk, thinking that their land goes right down to the tarred pavement of the way. That's not the edge of our,
I thought it was
of our
11
right-of-way.
feet.
It's different on every road.
It's different every
Because I
road.
remember when they finally got around to saying we're gonna put sidewalks into Whitewood,
Mhm.
everybody on this side was saying, yeah, the other side is a great place to put sidewalks.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Because people had built like walls,
Yes.
Yeah,
2, 3 feet, 4 feet from the road.
Yeah.
We had the same
fences,
sort of problem,
walls,
the same location.
Mhm.
They
Yeah.
had, there was a town wall that they had taken down, one of the historic, fieldstone, laid fieldstone walls, or placed fieldstone walls.
and that's a boundary infraction,
Yeah.
right, when they do that, yeah.
A what?
Boundary
right.
infraction.
We've actually had a couple of lawsuits in the past couple of years regarding trees and the boundaries, and one of them which involved the wall. Fortunately, we've been able to resolve them all to the town's benefit, but
But, I mean, Charles, isn't it pretty simple? The road, the map says the town owns 6 feet, 10 feet, whatever, from the road. So you take your little line and say,
It's not always accessible information without actually surveying and knowing where.
or getting the
lines are.
plan from the registry of deeds.
Right, right.
A lot of times, people, when they buy a property, they're just getting a zoning compliance survey, they're not getting an actual
Right.
plan with meets and bounds and distances and so forth, and it really, again, you'd like people to think that they own it, because you'd like for them to clean
maintain
the
it.
litter and maintain it, make it presentable, but in actuality, a lot of that is town property.
A lot of times when I explain that to residents, about the lawn being torn up with snow plows, and, I said, well, that is part of the layout of the road. That's where we put our snow. They said, well, if that's your town property, you should be mowing it for me. That's a typical comment I get, so.
And in fact, most of the mailboxes and things that people
property.
have are on town property, they're not on their property.
Well, I remember we went through that where people had the designer mailbox.
Oh, yeah.
And I mean, I could sympathize with them. I had a mailbox when I was down in Virginia, and I liked it, so I would go down and buy one, put it up.
Mhm.
Lasted me forever till my daughter became a high school person, and then all of a sudden, my mailbox got destroyed.
Wasn't me.
No, it wasn't. It wasn't. It was during the summer, and I went and replaced it. Once again, it got destroyed. So I bought one of these guaranteed never to be, broken. It was cast iron with a big 5-gallon bucket of cement.
Mhm.
Miserable. I forgot about high school boys. Miserable boys. They dug it up and took it. But I mean, literally, I knew that was on town property because it's about 2 feet from the road.
Yeah.
And then we made the mistake of getting that Cape Cod dissolving berm that they put up, and it looks real pretty. And then within 3 years, the
Wears it
trucks
out.
have eaten it.
Wears it out.
Plows, yeah.
The other aspect of it too is that there are other, other natural vegetation on the sides of the roads that the town owns, and if you remove them, whatever it may be, whether it be, blueberry bushes or what have you on the sides of the road, that's also town property that you're disturbing. So.
But do we ever care, really?
I think sometimes, especially, there are designations in the Commonwealth now, scenic roadways. You might, I don't know that Milford has any.
I don't believe
but
we
I know
have.
Franklin has a couple, and if you have a scenic roadway, the beauty of that road is, it's visual appearance and it's aesthetics, and you want that continued throughout the entire course of
so
the
you
road.
don't want somebody in
So
the
in
middle.
some instances, sure. Also, you may not want those bushes there, but I may live across the street from you and not like looking at your house every day. I'd rather look at trees or bushes or shrubs. So, if it's public property, there is some impact that it has.
But then who is the arbitrator? I don't like blueberry bushes.
Well,
I do.
The reality is it's town property, so you shouldn't really be doing anything until you check with the town, and then the town can make the decision as to what can go and what cannot go.
Are you going to make that decision?
No, he is.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
No,
Well, that's
I-
okay.
Yeah,
It
I get
depends
blamed
what
for
it is.
everything. I'm not
People
blamed
people
for that.
blame the
Somebody-
barrister
yeah,
for
you know,
everything.
Yeah,
So.
yeah.
If
That's
it's
what
a
one
rock
thing to
that's sitting there that's obviously in the way and people obviously hit it, then we will take it out. There's situations we do what we have to do.
And there are
The
safety
trees,
situations, irrespective of the aesthetics, there are safety situations.
Right.
If you have shrubs that are blocking, a curve or something like that, you're gonna
When
wanna take those
shrubs
out.
are ruining a site distance or whatever, we will send a letter to the property owner and ask them to trim them, because it's usually their tree or their shrub coming off their property. If they say they can't or they won't or whatever, then we will go in there and trim it.
Good. Look at Mill Pond Circle. I've had more people say they almost got hit by cars. We have to go around the other side because the bush just got huge and the house has been for sale forever.
Yeah.
But you inch out and you can barely see around it. I didn't know there was any recourse to say that's dangerous.
Oh, yeah.
I think there's rules regarding intersections and plantings in town here. The building department would know that. I don't think you can plant within 20 feet.
Right, but if
Of
you
an
plant
intersection.
a huge pine tree, eventually it's beyond it's
Yeah.
on the road.
Yeah, you
know.
don't want
town
it to
would
be
have-
able to take
The
out
town
that
would have
site
the right to
distance.
come in and
Yeah.
take down anything. that's
But I give
sold
everyone the
on
benefit now. I let them handle it first, because they may be trimming a certain way. It's their bush. Otherwise, we're just gonna trim it right off. So,
Look at Mill Pond Circle.
we will look at
Nobody's living there. Right? It's scary when you're edging out, and I see
Yeah.
some of the kids, they just
Oh, yeah.
run right out. Now, tell me about this thing called Tree City. I think of an Amazonian forest. What is Tree City?
Tree City USA is a designation that's given to a municipality, a community, in recognition of its attentiveness to the canopy, the tree canopy of the community, its expenses, its per capita expense on tree-related maintenance and care, plantings and things like that. It's given by the Arbor Day Foundation. The Arbor Day Foundation is a nonprofit organization that started about 1972, about the 100th anniversary of the first celebration of Arbor Day. And their mission is to increase tree plantings, tree awareness, tree appreciation, and as one of the things that they do, one of their programs is called Tree City USA. So there's an application process. It's administered in the state of Massachusetts by the Massachusetts Department of Conservation and Recreation. And they review the applications or the reapplications, because you have to renew it every year, to determine whether you've met the criteria, and if you have, they pass it on to the Arbor Day Foundation, and if everything looks good and they approve your application, you get recognized. So this year, the town of Milford, through the efforts of the tree warden, the highway surveyor, the selectmen, etc., the town of Milford applied for that status, and we received it for the very first time. And it's something that the Massachusetts Department of Conservation and Recreation really encourages communities to do. There are quite a few communities. If you drive through Wellesley, for example, you'll see that they've been a Tree City USA for something, 35, 40 years. They've been there for a long, long time, almost since the beginning. And then you have communities like Milford, where we're just celebrating our first year, and we're working towards recertification for next year, maybe even a growth award.
Right.
So it's a good thing. There are lots of advantages that come from it, and it was a nice thing to see a group of people from the town's perspective all come together to work towards the goal of getting us certified. So we are.
So now, if you looked at it from an uneducated point of view, and you said, do we spend enough money on trees?
Yes.
We all look at Chucky and say, too much. Every year he comes in for more money.
More
but
money, but tree work is expensive, there's no doubt about it.
We've also, in the past few years, had a real attack on the integrity and health of our trees in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, between Asian longhorned beetles, emerald ash borers, and things like that.
Gypsy
There-
moth.
Yeah, a lot
Drought.
of the trees, a lot of the historic trees in town, particularly a lot of the ash trees in the past few years, have died off. And if you have those trees died off and you don't remove the branches, eventually they're gonna end up in the roadways, they're gonna take down power lines and create all sorts of problems. So you have to be prophylactic sometimes and take those steps, which is one of the things.
Ash, once it dies, it decays quite rapidly.
But now, this ash beetle thing,
Ash borer, yeah.
ash borer,
Yep.
I mean, it seems those were around, because I lost a couple trees, just,
It
they
could be.
died.
Yeah, well, could be.
I had
You gotta
about
look at them closely,
I
but
had about 15 trees in my yard this year that had to be taken down, and the vast majority of them were ash, and they all died, all simultaneously. I had 4 of them that were enormous. They were 150 years old or more, and they all
Well,
died.
I mean, we read and we tried everything about putting the barrier
yeah, that's.
around. I even put a picture of my mother-in-law, figuring she's gonna scare anything away.
Well,
But that didn't work either.
you say that, but I've had people call this year and in other years, they'll go out and put Vaseline
Yes.
or grease on the tree itself. Well,
Is that so that they slide down the tree?
Yeah.
What does Vaseline do?
it stops them from, they don't want to cross it, but you're killing or have killed your tree with kindness when you do that. Because that seeps into the cambium and kills all the bark off, and that's it. The tree will die.
So, okay, you've got this Asian,
Yeah, you wouldn't do that for the Asian longhorn beetle.
okay.
That's
So
a
the
different.
borer, I don't want it to eat my ash tree. What do I do?
Well, you want to keep your tree healthy, because borers tend to attack weakened trees.
How do I know? Do I go up to it and say, do you feel good? And the tree
Yeah.
says, I feel good, so it's healthy? How do
Well, probably the easiest way, if you're really intent on keeping that tree healthy, would be to call in a certified arborist and have them recommend a program.
I spent $5,000 a few years ago trying to, an arborist came in and he futzed around and all. Do most people do that?
Not so much here, but in other areas of the state, it's done constantly, yeah.
We had a conversation about a new construction where they wanted this massive tree. It was absolutely imperative that they preserve this tree on site, et cetera. They couldn't damage it and so forth, and they spent tens of thousands of dollars just to preserve that one tree.
Sure.
You know, if you have, one of the things you look at from a legal perspective on some of these trees, you cut down the town's trees, that's a problem for the town. But there's also value in that tree. The value is calculated a couple of different ways. It can be calculated in terms of the cordwood that's created, or the value of the timber, the lumber, and so forth as a resource. Also, though, the aesthetic value, or the ability to bring in a tree of comparable size. So you cut down an 80-foot tree, technically the law requires you to replace it with the same tree.
How could you even bring in an 80-foot tree?
Believe it or not, that is done. It's very expensive.
But don't the roots have to go out 80 feet?
Yeah, but, the roots go past the drip line, but the critical root zone is at the drip line, but they go way past the drip line. But tree moving is a very big business.
Tree moving.
Yeah, you can move a house, right? You've seen that happen. They can move extremely large trees.
I never knew that.
Yeah.
I knew you could cut them down
Yeah,
because you
you can
keep
cut 'em
taking money
down.
from us to
I
do that.
yeah.
But you know, when you look at the heights, you know, the Prospect Heights behind, was it sycamores?
Those are
London Plane.
London plane trees. They're a
London-
relative of the sycamore, but yes.
I mean, that's something that we all grew up, they've been there, I don't know how long, but
Well, I would imagine the heights, I stand corrected if so, but Was that built by Drapers?
Yes.
Yeah, so I would imagine that those trees were put in when Draper,
30s?
I would say, maybe even longer. There's a brook that passes under those trees.
Yes.
And that brook was open at one time.
Yes.
And some of the older residents said that the first residents coming into the Heights and so on, well, I guess most of them worked in the foundry at Drapers. And the clothes would all be washed in the brook way back then.
That I didn't know.
Yep. There's quite a history up there. I believe that's on the National Historic Register.
Because I remember, you think of Joe Duke, 19 and 21. See, in the Heights, we never knew anything. We just knew everybody by their numbers.
Yeah.
So that brook was open right in front of Joe Duke's house. It went behind Wally Costa's house.
That was open back then?
It was all
Really?
open when we were kids.
Yeah.
Yeah, because you'd go in there looking for frogs and turtles, and you never found anything good.
It's gonna be open again behind Wally's house, because that whole section's collapsing.
Oh,
Yeah. Yeah, we're having a big problem there.
so now is that part of? We think of the 3 big brooks, but we never think of the.
That's the Hospital Brook. if I'm
That's
not
Hospital
mistaken.
Brook.
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Never knew where it went. I mean, so many of the brooks in Milford take dives and just disappear.
Well, that's where it ends up, at the hospital, it cuts through, and then it connects up with the other brook.
Godfrey, does
I think it's the Godfrey, yeah. It connects up with that whole system right there.
So, normal person has trees, and they're looking at them and they're told, keep them healthy. Like we had to have somebody come and prune our cherry tree
Mm-hmm.
to keep it healthy.
Sure.
What else do you do?
Well, you
For
want
trees.
to keep insects and disease problems away through
Okay.
spraying. First of all, it'd have to be diagnosed as to what's there, so it'd either be an insecticide or a fungicide if you have a bad infestation of either a fungal disease or insects. And then you'd probably want to also fertilize your trees.
No fertilizer.
And some of the fungicides, if I'm not mistaken, can be applied by means of like an injection into the tree.
Correct.
It's not spray, it's actually like
Yeah, correct.
an injectable fungicide.
He's right.
A lot of trees which are prone to disease, elm trees, for example, they've developed new strains to fight off Dutch elm disease.
Correct.
But even though they're resistant, that's all they are. And so sometimes
He's
you
right.
give them a little boost with a fungicide. It's like taking a boost of
So the
vitamin C.
fungicide actually penetrates into the
Well,
core wood.
if you're injecting it, as Charles has said,
No, but
yes.
I'm just saying if you don't.
No, if you spray it on, if it's a spray, a fungicide is really not all that curative, it's more preventative.
And it can be done preventative too, is
Right.
through an injection. Just
You know, the perfect apple that we all see in the store, not the organic one, those are all sprayed probably every 7 to 10 days during the growing season prior to picking.
which is why when you go out and pick apples, you see ones with little blemishes, it looks like little moles and things on them. They're perfectly good, but they just don't look as good because they're not
Correct.
tended to that extent.
So if you have fruit trees and you intend to
So
keep
the most
them,
beautiful apple is the one that's been eaten an algicide or a fungicide
Well,
every
yeah.
week.
pretty much.
Oh boy, I'm switching to pears.
Sure, it's not different.
Yeah.
But isn't burying a tree also, burying it, a lot of people bark while it's way up on their trees.
That's probably one of the worst things you could possibly do. We see it every day. They mulch the tree at the base,
Yes.
and then they bring it up the tree.
And that's not good.
Oh, that's very bad. That's really killing it with kindness.
Why?
Well, if a tree is planted correctly, it always flares out right at the base. That flare has a gas exchange going on. And what you're doing is you're smothering it. And you can see in the winter, after a snowstorm, the snow melts around the tree, just a little bit out from the base. That's because of that gas exchange.
So the oxygen's coming out?
Well, it's not really coming out. It's probably carbon dioxide more than oxygen. The oxygen comes from the photosynthesis, the leaves.
The leaves, okay.
In the
I
presence
thought
of-
it ate CO2.
Yeah, in the presence of sunlight, water, and CO2, the tree photosynthesizes. It takes in that CO2, mixes it with water, You know, it gets,
Hydrolyzes it and makes oxygen.
well, the oxygen is a byproduct that's given off. It takes the CO2 in the water and it makes sugars and carbohydrates for food for the tree. And it sends those sugars down into the roots for storage.
I did not know that.
Yeah,
Never studied trees.
no.
What's the majority, we say ash and all, around my house I seem to see pine trees everywhere. What's the most common type of tree in Milford?
Oak.
Oaks,
Oak.
sugar maples. You're saying pine, but are they really pines, or could they be spruce or hemlock?
How would I tell the difference?
No, by the needles and the growth habits and the
They're
bark.
very
and-
tall. They have needles that fall.
Yeah. Oh, well, needles that fall, that
It's
could
probably a white pine or.
it could be a pine or a red pine,
Red
white
pine,
pine,
white
pitch pine.
Down at the
Yeah,
bottom,
but-
I have
yeah.
enough oak trees to keep Scotty loves picking up leaves.
Does he? Yeah.
Oh,
We
God,
love
yeah.
the oak leaves.
Well, that's
My
something we should
favorite.
talk about at some point, because that's an important
Yeah.
part of the
Tree
Tree City
City.
USA designation, what we do, how we take care of diseased trees, and how we deal with yard waste, and how we recycle it. One thing I found coming to Milford was that the programs here are really innovative. There's a lot of things that we do here that other communities could emulate, and also it's a lot that we do here helps save the taxpayers' dollars.
But I mean, we push the leaves down,
Yep.
and the leaf gnomes come, and all the leaves go away.
No, they don't. They come to me.
Yeah, I was gonna say.
They come to our dump site.
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember the one time when we were like week 5, the death week, and you came early. My mother was out there with a broom. You call that Mr. Scotty. He better come back. Because, first week or so, when we get week 1, I carry my 2 leaves down to the bottom of the driveway and put them down,
Yeah.
and then hope that you run ahead of schedule and come back and get the rest.
Yeah.
But
It's coming.
Mm-hmm.
something that really is a service to Milford.
It's a service, but it also, this gets away from the trees a little bit, but we recycled those leaves. We recycled the last 5 or 6 years worth of leaves and have made like 2,500, 2,800 yards of pure loam, beautiful pure loam, that we're using on uptown fields, we're using on the edge of the road when we're doing projects, we're using with everything we can, so we're not buying loam anymore. And we made it at a simple cost of probably $2 or $3 a yard.
And that's the one that you're always bulldozing to
Yeah.
oxygenate
Yep.
the leaves.
We flip it, we add lime to it, we do everything we're gonna do to break it down as fast as we can.
And
So-
if I'm not mistaken, you can go to the highway yard and pick up some.
Not-
oh,
not-
that's mulch.
Not the loam, but the actual compost that you get,
No.
the dirty compost, is not processed in any way. That's straight up decomposed leaves. That you can take from the highway department for your garden or whatever. But we took that a step further and we cleaned it and screened it and made beautiful, absolutely beautiful loam. Great stuff.
So how does that help the trees?
Well, for one thing, you're not paying a cost to have them disposed of. You have to
Right.
understand that if we're not taking them and converting them into something that we can use, we're then paying somebody to remove them and dispose of them. And so there's a double savings here. We're not shelling out that expense every year, but also we are, because we're not shelling that out, we're creating these resources that we don't have to buy. So we don't have to buy our loam, we don't have to buy compost, we don't have to buy, in some cases, mulch and things like that, because we can create our own.
Well, that was the same thing, Charles, when we did the transfer station. Because we kept saying, if you don't give people a legitimate, easy way, then late night asylum strafing runs
Yeah.
happen.
Yeah.
And I don't see when I grew up, there were refrigerators, old TVs, there was
Right.
everything lining.
Still is.
Still is?
We stay on top of it the best we can, but there are certain areas in town that have magnets for trash. It's constant.
And that's-
And
constantly
sometimes
do.
what you need to do is you need to put up one of those motion sensor
Yeah.
video cameras and catch the people dumping.
Mm.
Yeah, see, I'd have no sympathy towards anybody dumping now. But you got the transfer station.
There's no reason.
The old days, I could see it when they closed the dump. Plains Park. I can't call it the dump anymore.
Yeah.
Some of the new
Remember
people
that
in Milford
place.
look at you and, the dump? We have a dump?
We said that was a full dump.
I
a
know.
It was
beautiful
quite
place.
the dump,
That was
yeah.
awesome.
I've never
And
seen
it was something
Fires
that
were
we'll
going
forget.
all the time down
Now we
there.
have geese.
Yeah, we have
Yeah.
the geese, yeah.
So back to the recycling, all the trees Chucky cuts, all the trees that we cut, all the brush that's dropped off by residents gets processed too, that gets recycled. Every couple of years, we make a couple thousand yards of bark mulch for, in-town use. We use it on all our
Yeah.
buildings, our parks, wherever we have to.
I had it all done.
At probably less than half the cost as it is buying it.
I had it done this year. So basically, we have to get rid of that brush pile and log pile. So we call in a company to grind it. We let it set, and the grinding set, and they do what we call cook. They're breaking down a little bit. And we buy the colorant, put it on
Oh,
that.
so it looks like red mulch or
Yeah, we use
Pick your
brown.
color.
It's a more natural looking.
So
And
this year
now,
we made a deep dark brown. We've made black before. We've done red every couple of years.
oh,
And these are the programs that were already in place for which we weren't really being credited because we had never bothered to apply. As I said, you have an alignment of stars where you get the selectmen, highway, tree warden, all working towards this effort and moving it forward, and now we get the designation for something we could have been getting perhaps for years.
Didn't even
And one of the
realize we were doing it.
advantages for that is when and if we apply for any of the grants that are related to trees and the outdoors and things like that, you get extra points in terms of the application evaluation process. You get extra points if you're a designated
yeah,
tree city.
in-kind donations and
Yeah.
so on. We had a lot of help this year from Brenda Wheelock and the Girl Scout troop. They were very helpful.
what did they do?
They were running a booth at the Milford Beautification Day.
Oh, cool.
And they reached out to Bartlett Tree Service, which is a national firm, who donated seedlings to the town, and they handed them out. They had well over 300 seedlings, and they were free. People came along and took them. They loved all different varieties, took them home and
Now,
planted them.
you get a lot of attention, like when you had those people come in that can, the automated termite people, they can eat 200 trees in a single day or
Yeah,
two.
yeah, they did very well.
But
That was
It's-
a huge savings to the town.
when do we put back trees? That's the thing we never hear about. We hear Chucky's cutting down 20 here, 30 there, or
Yeah.
the auto termite guy that took 200 away.
We do replant, not at the rate I would like to, because you'll have the big one if we come in and ask for money again for that. But I like to get as many trees planted as possible. We've planted in the two town cemeteries, both North Purchase and here at Vernon Grove. One of the trustees from the nursing home asked about planting along the berm up there at Asylum
It's
Street.
Asylum Street.
Right,
So
so
separation of some sort.
that will be
Oh.
expensive. They're gonna need quite a few trees up there. So we will be doing that.
But realistically, Chucky, when I moved into my house,
Right,
I went out and bought, it was dirt cheap. The trees were about this big.
small.
They weren't that expensive. I just put them. Now, god dang things. I used to cut the tops off to make them grow fuller.
Mm-hmm.
Now they're too tall for me. But it was 30 years. Seems like a long time.
Well,
but
that's how a tree would grow in value. You paid a little bit of money for a little tree. Now think of paying to have that tree that you're saying is too tall. Think of buying that.
no. But I'm just wondering
That's
if you
the
got
cost is
a
phenomenal.
smaller tree
Yeah.
and just bought a bunch of them and said, I know 15 years, 20 years is a long time, but
What really proactive communities are doing is they are establishing their own tree
Nurseries,
farms.
yeah.
So they'll sit down, they designate a certain area of land, they put in some saplings or seedlings,
What a great
various
idea.
species,
Oh.
and they
Yeah,
say,
yeah.
okay, these, we're not gonna go out and buy, a 2-inch caliper tree in 10 years, we're going to grow it
it
here
now.
Grow it here,
for
yeah.
pennies, and then when we're ready and we need to transplant it onto town property, we'll be ready and just move it.
why don't we
So-
do that? The highway surveyor always says he has too much money and not enough to spend.
He's got
it on.
lots of ideas. There's another idea I think that he's gonna talk about in a little bit.
I mean, that wouldn't cost that much to set up,
No,
would
it's
it?
just the land. No,
It's
no,
just the land,
there's
you
a
gotta
little bit
do
of
it, and then you gotta,
maintenance.
there's a
you got
little
the
bit
dirt.
of maintenance.
There's
Yeah.
maintenance.
But let me just
Yeah.
also comment a second, because you asked about, what are we doing to plant trees, and there are some efforts. So we've been engaged in a couple of different lawsuits regarding the unlawful cutting of trees on town property. and we've resolved those cases in both cases successfully. One case, we had the trees replaced, the ones that we picked the trees that we wanted, the size that we wanted, and these are fairly mature. But we also got a contribution to a fund that can be used for either tree planting or for tree maintenance.
We have some money there for tree planting.
Up over there on Bear Hill, Casey Drive and so forth, when we approved that subdivision, there were certain requirements that they plant so many street trees, and the builder is now in the process of doing some of those trees and things like that. So there's another kind of, prospective sort of way of dealing with trees and ensuring that we get tree plantings. So what you really want to do is you want to have a successful program, which is what we're beginning to grow here. You want to have cooperation between private individuals and the public. We want to be planting a few trees every year. We want companies to plant trees. Sometimes you want in-kind donations. You also want to have a tree program where youth as well as private homeowners get an opportunity and understand and appreciate the value of trees in the community. And just as I say, if you go onto the Arbor Day Foundation website, you'll find that they've done studies of the values of property, residential property, with and without trees. Far more valuable with trees and mature trees.
When we built our house down in Maryland, it was amazing, because down there they come in and they clear cut.
Everything.
I mean, they take everything down to dirt. And then you get your house, and you had the crab apple here, and the other, you had 3 trees. Every house had 3 exact trees. And, we got back to Milford. When we got back to New England, I said, this is so much nicer that you got old growth.
Yeah.
Right.
It doesn't feel like Washington felt like what it was, is,
Well,
a standard, no frills. Okay, I got my crabapple tree. I got this tree. I got that tree. And my neighbor had the same 3 trees. Sometimes they changed them around to make it different.
Yeah.
But there is, I love in the spring when the trees come in. In the winter I can see Chris Moran's house. We can wave at each other.
Yeah.
In the summer, in spring, the trees fill in, and you got to
fill in, you have some screen. Plus they're giving us all of those benefits. But the law allows towns to plant back on private property up to 20 feet from the layout.
Wow.
That's
Now, we bought some land like down in the plains and other places that, as far as I know, has been left. Asylum Street's just there. Can we set up a tree farm there?
I'm sure it's possible.
It can't be that much money.
Well, one of the things you have to make sure of is if you're going to start putting in specimen trees, that when you go to harvest them and transplant them 10 years later, they're still there.
Yeah.
So you want to have some degree of security too.
Right.
You want to
You
make
gotta have
sure.
some
People
security,
would
you gotta
steal the
have,
trees?
Right, and is
you
it,
gotta have water.
is it wise
Well,
to,
I would.
clear trees, to plant trees, to replant trees?
So
I mean,
somebody's
I don't
gotta
know.
keep weeding around them so the weeds don't take over when they're,
Yeah,
But
they
would
gotta
we
respond
care if the
to-
weeds grew?
Yes.
Would they hurt the
Yeah.
trees?
yeah.
Weeds hurt trees?
Well, a tree is not gonna grow near as fast as a
Oh.
weed is. And when the weeds get up above them, they start to shade them out, and they need the sunlight. So it may
But once the
make the
trees
tree
get a good
contorted.
size,
Well, you still really would wanna keep the weeds down and away. That's not
interesting.
as hard as, you look at everybody's gone by a nursery, you can see that they're not,
Yeah, it's
laden
not.
with weeds.
You
No,
know,
but
now, we have a new issue today, which is, how we accommodate solar power and also keep, the value of trees and these mature trees around. Back, if you look again at Arbor Day website, or if you go back 200 years ago, you would see most of these old farmsteads had, a line of pine trees, some sort of year-round screening in the northeast to buffer the winds from the
Buffer the
northeast
winds,
storms,
yeah.
and yet the south side of the property would have all deciduous trees, so that in the summer, you get the coolness, you get the sun coming along on the south side, and it blocks the heat from the house, and it keeps the house a little cooler when we didn't have air conditioning. And then in the wintertime, the leaves drop and you get full solar effect and the house is a little bit warmer. So there were strategic ways, and we've lost a lot of that in the years because we create our own heat and cooling.
Yeah, but if you're putting up solar panels, I mean, how can they affect the trees? Unless
The
you
trees
cut
are
down.
affecting the solar panels, they're not.
Oh, they're shading them out.
They're shading them
People will
out.
cut the
Cut
trees
the trees
down to
down.
maximize the solar generation.
Oh,
No,
that doesn't sound like a good idea.
depends on what side you're on. Right?
I like Milford,
Really?
so I like trees.
Go on the National Tree Benefits Calculator, and it will tell you, you put in the type of tree you have, the size, your zip code, and it will tell you what the savings you can gain from that tree is for heating, cooling, how much rainwater it intercepts, how much storm water it intercepts.
But now, most
it'll give
people
you a
will
value.
think that's calculated by affectionately known as tree huggers. So the data is not going to be unbiased.
No, I don't think it is. There's two national firms that got together and made this program up, and it's quite useful.
You know, and I joke about it, but Town Park has trees. You know, the pool. Absolute question. Why would anybody go to Casey Pool? They would never put a tree up there. You know, when we were kids, they were building it. My handprint, I shouldn't say that, it's still in the corner of the men's room.
I never saw that.
You know, no, it's some random kid from the Heights. But you go down to Milford Pool, Fino, and the biggest difference was all the shade.
The Grove, it's
Wow,
beautiful.
shade.
That is such a resource for this town that
Yeah.
few, if any, other communities have. Unbelievable.
And we'll get into the argument. I mean, you've been there. How many years? One of our FinCom members and I went at it all the time. Because every 3 or 4 years, they'd need a couple $100,000 for the pool. And it was like, oh, we'd be better off, and he was right. Financially, you'd be better off making a skate park out of the Milford pool because it'd be cheaper to have that Casey pool. But I kept saying, it's not Milford. The trees down there, the fact that I could take my friends, you know, you got little kids, have a picnic.
How long has Milford Pool been there? I mean, forever. My father swam there as a kid.
That was a sand bottom pool at one time.
Yes.
Yeah, my
Yeah.
father's kid.
Yeah, Pete came and told us about that. I mean, I remember the rite of passage. It sounds so terrible, but you were a man when you could swim across the deep end to the piers.
Correct, yeah.
You know, that was a rite of passage in Milford. Or going behind what's now Votolato Field and getting your first kiss in the tunnel. You know, all that stuff that is Milford. You know, we're coming up on a major decision in the next year or two. Are we going to fund? It'll be $3.5 million to preserve that pool, to build new. You know, logically, oh heck no. You know, you can't justify that kind of money. But it's Milford. One of the reasons we squeeze everywhere we can is so that when something comes up, you know, I've always said Stacy School, financially we would have been much better off leveling Stacy School and putting up a ugly glass building. Be a lot cheaper, but it wasn't Milford. So when you look at some of the tree areas, you know, I mean, Congress Street, that area.
We planted back, quite a few years now. We got a $10,000 grant for tree planting, and we put many of the trees up along Congress Street. And when I was a young fella, it was just lined with sugar maples. The color in the fall was unbelievable.
How much does it cost to put in trees?
Depending on the size.
No, but I like Charles, that you don't buy a 20-foot tree
No,
and then you can afford 2 trees.
right.
But if you were going to buy reasonable size and just say,
We could probably
"It's
get
for my
the
grandson."
seedlings donated.
but then you got to dig the hole.
Right.
So how much would?
And we could probably get volunteers to do that.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
So why aren't we doing it?
Well, we have to develop a piece of land.
Well, this
That's the
program
whole
is one
thing.
of the aspects of promoting and creating public awareness and letting people know that there are opportunities that they can volunteer.
I love the idea. You
Yeah.
know, I mean, Reno started with the crazy idea that he could put a paved piece of trail
Seems like yesterday, doesn't it?
doesn't it, when he kept
Yes,
coming
it
in?
does.
Well, the railroad
Wow.
might donate that piece of
20
land and
years
I'll
ago.
save my 30 grand and,
Yeah.
you know, what a nutty
look at it
idea.
now.
That'll never fly.
Look how nice that thing is.
And he kept going and going, and to his credit,
Oh.
it's probably the most popular
And,
piece.
and I'm not a Milfordian, and yet, before I ever came to this town to work, my family, every single one of us has used that trail.
Really?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do we need trees along the
It's a-
trail?
Well, they're mostly
A lot of
wooded.
trees along the trail. I
You
don't know
know-
where we can put any more.
We went through there with the park department call, we went down and went through there. We, last fall, we took out 112 dead trees along the
Tree
trail.
killer. See?
They were.
They were already killed.
My father and I, we got a grant several years ago. My father and I went and planted the trees. Rather than have municipal employees did it, we planted those trees. My father's now passed away, he's been dead for 5 years, but I still take my kids by those trees and I say, you see those trees? Your grandpa planted those trees, your grandpa and I. And that's one of the things about trees. There's a tree in my neighborhood where I grew up that my grandfather had planted. And that's one of the other things. You don't plant trees for yourself. You plant trees for your grandchildren. Those are the people who are going to.
Well, there's countries, you know, that you can donate money to plant a tree in Israel or somewhere. Maybe we could start the same thing here.
Yes, I think it would be
Because
wonderful.
I love the idea of saying, okay, $100, you get a tree.
Yeah.
Or you get 4 or 5 little baby trees.
At one time, there was a small tree nursery in town. Way back. It's up where the Milford Geriatric Authority, the new building is. That was all town property at one time.
Like a
Still
town-
is.
town,
I'm not sure who
Oh,
owns
it's
it
still
now.
Asylum Street? We still own that whole thing in the can't call it geriatric. The countryside.
Countryside, okay.
Yeah.
We'll go along with that.
Well, the problem was with the poor people up there, they're killing themselves to scrounge what they can because the state and the feds don't pay enough. So where the only place they make a profit is for people doing rehab. Like when my mother had her knees done, she has to go somewhere for 2-3 weeks. Now, they end up paying $600 a day. So, you know,
My
all of a
mother-
sudden they make $200-300 profit a day off the rehab. Problem was, nobody wanted to say, I'm going to the geriatric authority.
They wanted to say, I'm going to Countryside.
Well, anywhere but not the geriatric
Geriatric
authority. I'm
authority.
not that old. So they changed the name.
Makes sense.
The
Countryside.
service is still great, but that way they'd get more of the rehab people going there, where they can make up some of the money they lose. So I think they lose $50 or $60 every day of people on Medicaid or Mass Health. They're paying like $250 or some number below the minimum that they need to break even. So I mean that's something that it's an asset for Milford, but we got to be careful too.
There may be some vacant land up there that we could possibly use.
Talk to the land
You
czar.
could put a nice building up there.
Further back from the buildings that are there now.
What-
And an acre of trees.
Can we start with the acre of trees and we'll talk about the building?
One of the other things we need to be mindful of is species diversification.
Correct.
For example, at my college that I went to, they moved from the downtown and built a campus on the outskirts of the town back in the late 30s. They planted beautiful trees along the walkways and along the great lawns and things like that. And they began to notice about 20 years ago, a couple of the crowns of the trees were turning color early, and then within 3 or 4 years, the trees were dead. And they were all dead. And they sat there and scratched their heads, what caused the trees all to die at the same time? Well, some trees have lifespans, you know, like we do and so forth. And when you plant all of the same tree,
At the
which is what
same
they
time.
did at the same time, they're all gonna be reaching the end of their years right around the same time, or they get some sort of a fungal infection that affects that species more than others, and you're gonna lose them all. So we wanna make sure that when you plant trees, I have in your mind's eye the fact that, you know, not all of these trees will be affected by the weather and the environment in the same fashion.
So when Scotty digs his area for the tree farm, what kind of trees do you want him to put in there?
Well, we diversify. The general rule of thumb is not more than 10% of a genus and 5% of a
Okay,
species.
Chucky, that's the
Okay.
party of the first part had a party with the party of the third part, and they all decided they didn't want to have a party.
We don't.
No.
We don't want all the same kind of trees. Is
Talk
what
to
I'm
me
saying.
in,
So
I'm just a kid
if
from
there
the
are-
Heights.
if
Oak,
oaks,
pine, tell
maples,
me what you'd put in.
Oaks, maples. We would want to get in some ornamentals. There's different kind of birch trees. Ornamentals being dogwoods, crab apples. We could put in trees that you're probably not familiar with. Hornbeam. They're a very rugged tree. We want to stay away from the weaker species.
A weak tree?
Like willow. We wouldn't want to put any willows
Birch?
in. Certain birches would not be good.
The ones that bend and fall?
Yeah, those are gray birches. They're more natural tree.
We have silver maples in my yard, love them, they're absolutely gorgeous
Oh, yeah.
trees, but all you do is pick up after.
I was
So
gonna
things
say,
like that,
we love our maples till it comes to fall.
yeah.
Then all of a sudden, I'm knee deep in leaves.
Right.
I mean, thank God the guys come along and pick them up. Now
There's
you
many
get your
varieties
fancy
of
leaf
maple.
sucker trucks. Used to be those big, what were those, the sewer trucks? I can't call them that.
Vac trucks.
Yeah, now you get the little guys that seem to work better.
Yeah, actual leaf vac trucks, much better.
So,
So a big diversity of all types of trees. People do call, and if they ask for a tree, I do my best to get one that would suit the space
but
that it's grown in. Also,
Scotty's
that's
Tree
what
Farm,
Yeah.
are you gonna say we have 10 different kinds of trees, 5? What are the
Oh no, we'd be up in the maybe 20 different varieties.
20 different
yeah.
varieties of trees?
And,
Yeah.
and the other thing is, as they seed, you collect those seeds, and you can,
You
now
can grow
you're,
them
now
all.
you're,
Yeah,
you know, you have to buy your initial stock.
we
You
can
can
do
maybe
that.
get
You
some
can
from
plant from
seed.
seed.
Another thing to think about too is if you have a tree that blooms, you know, some sort of a magnolia or something like that that blooms at a certain time of the year. You have something that's very colorful and showy, you know, early to mid-May, late May. That's a tree you want to have where you might have veterans monuments or things like that, because it makes it showy at
At the
Memorial
right
Day,
time.
At the
At
right
the
time
right
of year.
time. Yeah.
How many
That's
trees can you
correct.
plant in 1 acre?
Depends on the spacing. Depends on the type of trees.
We're back to the party of the first part.
Well, if you're going to space the tree, say 5 by 5, that's 25 square
Right.
feet. So you divide that into your acreage, or 6 by 6, and that varies by tree,
And
whether it's
that's
a smaller
it's gonna
tree
be
or a
determined
bigger
how
tree.
big you're gonna let them grow before you transplant
Correct.
anything else.
Well, the spacing, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But-
it would
And
be-
another thing that's a great project is something like what Mrs. Wheelock did, which is you get the kids, each of them gets a seedling, and they get invested in that. They
Yeah.
get to bring it home, plant it in their yard,
Correct.
and that's their tree, and that's a lot of fun to watch the tree
Well,
grow.
I love the idea of doing it in your own yard, but I really like the pride you take in saying, my dad,
Yeah.
you know,
Right.
your grandfather
Yeah.
planted that
Yeah.
tree. How cool that would be.
You know, the thing about it, at the time I knew it was a special moment, but the thing about it today is I have strong memories of my dad and I out there doing that. And, you know, just, I didn't work well with my dad, but when planting the trees, we worked as a team. It was a good way to work, and it was just, you know, so there's so many different things that come out of that, so many different memories and emotions, and it's all wound up in that one tree. I look at, you know, you're talking about trees when you were a kid and the brooks and things like that. That's some of my fondest memories when I was a boy, was living in a city and hanging around with my friends, and hot summer day, we didn't have air conditioning, we were all under some tree. So I look at those trees today and I said, I remember
See,
that
that could
tree.
be cool. You could put some kind of, not book, but some kind of enclosure, and you could have, you know, Crisafulli, position 320 to 330.
Yeah.
You know, Ducorel, 310 to 320. You could start that, because why wouldn't I donate some money and have 10 trees in a row and say, that's, someday my great-grandson or whatever
Yeah.
can go there and look in that book. It reminds me of like when you go to the monument, the Vietnam monument
Right.
in Washington. The names are in order of when they passed away, so you'd be there all day trying to find it, but you can look and it says panel 32.
Right, right.
That would be a cool thing, and we may be able to get enough money
Yes.
to plant.
It's definitely
And-
worth
and-
looking at, definitely.
And we haven't even talked about the opportunities for fruit-bearing trees and the advantages to, you know, being able to have a pear tree, an apple tree, what have you, in your own yard, or even a community set of fruit-bearing trees where the public can come, you know, if we spray them, the public can come and pick off their
That would
own
be my,
trees.
that'd be my only worry, is that now you're taking on a job that you gotta maintain fruit trees.
That's why you need volunteers. to do it.
Volunteers will do that.
It's an educational opportunity for the classroom, it's an educational opportunity for Boy Scouts, Girl Scouts,
Right.
all sorts of civic groups. It's a great way, you know, if you can connect with the tree, it's a great way for you to go out and say, this is my tree, even if it's on public land, this is the tree I'm caring for. There are stewardship programs where, we don't have one here in Milford, but we could develop a stewardship program where people get assigned to take care of this tree. You come out every so often, you see if there are any branches that are broken or need to be trimmed, you fertilize it, water it, mulch it.
I mean, even for people like me who have no mechanical ability, you could say you pay so much a year and we'll make sure that your trees,
We'll try and do our best,
you
sure.
know, number 300 to 310, if you're paying, we're gonna have somebody that we hire or volunteer.
Volunteer. I think we could go to the, some of the closer vocational schools. Some of those have schools have landscape programs.
Could be much like the flag program where, you know, you pay a certain amount and the flags are put on your property, you pay a certain amount.
We're gonna call Dr. Mike and say, can we have the beavers come out and trim the trees?
Well,
Somehow.
let's have them plant them. We'll get.
I was gonna say, I mean, their mascot being the beaver
Yeah,
doesn't seem
yeah.
a little off, that, okay, have the beavers come out and chew on the tree.
Yeah, the Boy Scouts is a great idea
Yeah.
because they were always looking for good service projects.
I
and,
think it just takes somebody to get it going. You know, when you look at our trail, it took Reno's drive and commitment. And now, I don't think anybody, when you had to buy that octopus thing that costs a fortune to maintain the trail, you know, instead of just a lawnmower, it's got the arms and the legs, and it looks like a big octopus. I don't think you got any grief at all. People just, either you or the parks, just said, okay, if that's the price of maintaining the trail,
right.
we're just gonna do it. I like this.
It's interesting stuff.
That's even
Sure.
another place you can plant some. It doesn't always have to be trees. We could plant some flowering shrubbery along the trail that will eventually mature and have really nice little areas with a bench that people could sit and so on. There's an awful lot we can do out there.
Thank you for coming out, because I had no idea, but this now got me intrigued. And we proved you can have an enjoyable conversation with the barrister.
Yeah, just one.
Just one. That's it for this year. We'll have him back next year. As always, to our 6 loyal viewers, thank you. This is a heck of an idea. I mean, we're always looking for how do we make Milford just a little bit better, and putting these trees down, and not just the trees, but I love the idea of being able to take my grandson there and saying, these are our trees. We put them there. You know, one more tie back to Milford. So as always, thank you for joining us. May God bless, and may tomorrow be a better day than today. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Not too long since I've been home. Been running all my life just